side. Thank you.
Hi everyone, it's really a pleasure to be speaking to you here today. So, as you know, the motion is personalised learning harms children. It's a pretty provocative motion, and when Catherine came up with it, she kind of looked at the motley crew that is the Michaela staff and thought, who do I know that's stupid enough to defend this one? And she thought, I know, I have just the person. So here I am. To attempt to defend the idea of personalised learning in this amazing City Hall today. So, I kind of want to begin by telling you a story, and I know that Stuart Locke's tweeted saying he's not a fan of anecdotes to prove an argument, but I actually do think this is helpful when we're talking about something that is so personal as personalised learning. So, it's a story about a boy called Jason. About a year ago, a file landed on my desk. It was huge, about the size of a rucksack. And I kind of wish that schools sent files on these types of children as a scroll rather than as a kind of pile of paperwork, so I could kind of scroll it out dramatically around my office and read it a bit more carefully. But so this folder contained hundreds of pieces of paper about a boy called Jason who was due to start at Michaela this September that's just gone. And reading through all the documentation, I thought, crikey, we're really going to have our work cut out with this kid. I mean, the list of needs was just so long and boggling attached to his name. So, for example, things like weak social skills, low reading and spelling skills, low math skills, weak writing skills, low confidence, low self-esteem, poor social awareness, poor self-control, poor concentration, poor behaviour. And all I could think was, poor Jason, you know, he's having a tough time. But the list of support mechanisms, kind of promisingly, was even longer. A personalised curriculum that was heavily differentiated vocabulary, different methods of recording his learning, targeted questioning, an individually designed literacy and numeracy programme, speech and language therapy, and so on. The list was endless, to be honest with you. So a few weeks later, trying to work out how we're going to help this pupil when he comes to Michaela, I went to go and visit him in his primary school. Jason, his teacher said, is very different to other children. He is a very unique boy and therefore requires a very unique approach. She told me that Jason was not a happy boy and that his self-esteem was through the floor. He struggled academically. He was poorly behaved, lacked focus and concentration. He struggled to remember things. He was perpetually frustrated. He lost his temper. He had few friends. The conversation went on. She explained how she gives him different tasks and different lessons in diverse ways to suit his needs. She needs to go at a slower pace, so that otherwise he won't stay focused. She needs to plan strategically to fill in the precise gaps in his knowledge. Everything has to be personalised in order to help him learn. Jason requires a very unique approach because Jason is a very unique boy. In my head, I compared Jason briefly to some of the other kids that I teach at Michaela. I thought of kids like Emily, who didn't know what a triangle was when she started. I thought of kids like Jason, who could not sit still when he first came to our school. I thought about kids like Mohammed, who unfortunately didn't learn the alphabet until he was in year 5. All of these children have various issues, granted, but Jason was by no means any weaker than any of those children, nor was he any less capable than they were of meeting our standards. We don't offer those children a highly personalised approach at Michaela because even though they are unique people, they are not unique in terms of how they learn. And I suspected that Jason was just the same. Personalised learning harms children. It harms children like Jason because it is premised on the idea that every child learns differently. This leads to a multitude of different activities that aim to suit the child's needs, but often overlook tasks that best suit the content being taught. For example, when teaching a novel, I might be tempted to give children different extracts according to their reading ability, or give the Jasons of the world a vocabulary bank to support them with the reading. I might ask them to read their extracts in groups or pairs, and then get them to look up words in the dictionary. But at Michaela, we choose not to do that. Instead, we choose to read the whole text together as a class, reading line by line with a ruler, pausing occasionally to explain new words and to practice pronunciations as we go. In Michaela lessons, everybody reads and everybody writes. That's it. It's guided by the teacher, the subject expert, and pupils are expected to keep up. Personalised learning harms children like Jason because it lowers our expectations and prevents us from really believing that they can achieve. There's no escaping the fact that personalised learning necessarily requires creating different resources and teaching children in different ways. Not only is this inefficient and a huge burden on teacher time, and not only does it mean that the weakest children miss out on the benefits of whole class instruction, but it is a clear statement that children like Jason are unable to access the same work as other children. Knowing that a child has a need of any variety very subtly skews our view of them. Somewhere deep down we think, well, she's got that need, so she's going to struggle with this. And I know that some of you sitting here will be thinking, well, no, I don't think that. But we have to accept the fact that labels inevitably colour our view of the child. And our entire system is set up to encourage this. So I'm not blaming teachers. The system is set up to encourage this. Ofsted inspectors and senior teams across the country demand colour-coded, differentiated seating plans demonstrating exactly how we intend to personalise the learning for the pupil premium kids, the dyslexic kids, the kids with behaviour issues, and so on. But this is harmful. It's harmful because it damages our expectations and prevents us from believing that every child really can achieve. At Michaela, we believe that everyone can do it. We believe that all children can access the same content if the teacher's explanations and examples are good. CPD revolves around building teacher knowledge and determining optimal teaching sequences and concept explanations, and it works. Last year, our Year 7 cohort made an average of 20 months progress in reading in just 10 months. The average pupil made 5 sub-levels of progress in English and maths, and pupils with special needs made 6. I promise you, nothing was ever personalised for these kids. Not Jason, not Emily, not Tyson, not Mohammed, not anyone. In fact, the reason we achieved these results is precisely because we didn't personalise learning at all. Instead, we prioritised whole class instruction where everybody reads and everybody writes. Finally, personalised learning harms children like Jason because it lowers the expectation they have of themselves. After all, if we don't believe that they can achieve the same as their peers, then why should they? Giving children personalised targets puts a ceiling on their expectations of themselves. Whether it's, I need to work on sitting still, or I need to work on analysing in more depth, the kid thinks that that is what they should focus on, that lesson. And learning targets, just like any targets in life, are damaging because they are all we end up aiming for. It puts a ceiling on children's expectations of themselves. Since joining in September, Jason has flourished. In his lessons, his teachers do not personalise his targets, set him different tasks, or record his learning in different ways. Instead, he gets consistently high quality, well-planned and delivered, whole-class instruction in a highly structured, focused environment. He works at the same pace as everyone else in the class. He works at the same pace as everyone else in the class because actually, he isn't that different to everyone else. Lots of his peers found the same things difficult that he found difficult. He made the same mistakes as everyone else and got confused when everyone else got confused. Because that's how learning works. Our minds aren't so different. But if the content itself isn't presented to us in the right way, we stand less chance of understanding it. Get the instruction right, and everyone can learn. And Jason has learned a lot this year. His reading age has improved by over 2 years. His behaviour has transformed. Where he used to lose his temper easily and end up in trouble often, he's now calm, focused and polite. He has made friends and earns lots of merits each week. He proudly wears a merit badge on his blazer for landing in the top 20 in the year group. Sure, some pupils may require a little extra time to really digest new stuff, but they don't need different approaches because they're somehow more unique than other children or learn in a different way to other children. We have mistakenly premised our entire system around the idea that each child is unique, when in fact they are not unique in terms of how they think or learn. Jason was far behind his peers, but that does not necessarily mean that he needs a personalised approach in order to make progress. And yes, it was hard for him at first. He did struggle from time to time, and do you know what? He still does. But it isn't struggle a good thing when you're learning? Isn't struggle something we should expose kids to from time to time to help build their resilience? Isn't that how we learn to persist when the going gets tough? Doesn't it make us feel even more proud of our achievements if we have to struggle to reach them? Jason struggled at first, but he persisted and consequently flourished. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that before today, many of you voted against this motion, thinking that personalised learning doesn't harm children. And intuitively, it does seem like it's a bit unreasonable to suggest that personalised learning is harmful. But I ask you to think again, and in particular, to think of Jason. Is it unreasonable to ask that every child is given the same access to the same curriculum at the same pace with the same high-quality teaching? Is it unreasonable to ask that every child is pushed as far as possible every single lesson, every single day? Is it unreasonable to want the best for every child, to believe that every child can achieve? Every child can achieve, but it is precisely because we personalise learning that many, in fact, don't. Every child can achieve, but the cult of personalised learning tricks us into believing that some children are less capable than they really are. Every child can achieve, and it is precisely because the system says that personalised learning makes things better that we actually make things worse. Ladies and gentlemen, personalised learning harms children because it reduces our expectations, it reduces their expectations, and most importantly, it reduces their outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. Now to open this side of the debate on Sherrington.
I'll just get my coat, shall I? Because that was, as an opening gambit, I would say that I don't really disagree with what Katie said in that sense, but really I'm going to just think about, well, what are we trying to discuss here? And we need to just think about what we're thinking of when we say personalised learning so that we can have a proper discussion, and also what might constitute harm. So is it individualised learning? Students in their learning pods negotiating their weekly learning goals with their personal learning tutor and choosing whether to attend their resilience seminar. Now that's a cartoonish scene that I'm not going to defend. I came close to that when I taught in the 80s and early 90s in a London comprehensive where we did Smile Maths, which was a bit like that, where you'd sit at the front and issue cards which the students would then go and learn by themselves, and you never actually stood up in front of the class to teach them anything. I'm not going to defend that. But do we mean something a bit more recognisable, where personalised means the opposite of standardised, where students' learning diet includes a degree of choice, where they have some degree of input or ownership, and where the curriculum experience of each student diverges from a common core? So with that in mind, I think the question becomes, how much personalisation and at what stage in the child's education is it most appropriate? I contend that it is not only desirable for children to have an experience of a degree of personalisation, but it's nigh impossible to deliver the opposite, a standardised curriculum, because children bring themselves to the process of learning, whether we want them to or not. We might argue that learning is inherently personalised, whatever we do. So even if you're setting the same high bar for every learner in your class in terms of the knowledge you want them to acquire, every learner does have different experiences and biases that shape their capacity to engage. And arguably it's more harmful not to personalise if you treat all the students as if they are the same. Of course they are similar, and generally the learning process is the same, but they are not literally the same. And in terms of differentiation, my advice to teachers is always to view it as a bit like gardening. It's not something where you need to do something different for every child all the time. But over the long run, every specimen in your classroom needs individual attention, needs to be prodded, pushed, supported, nudged, challenged at the right time. And if you were to meet my Year 10 maths class, Lily, Kais, Tanisha and Ezra need my attention differently at different points in a lesson and over the long run. And I think that's what personalisation means to me. We have the same basic curriculum, but I need to think of them differently because they respond differently to the way I teach them, and that's part of the organic process of being a teacher. So my contention is that a key factor in all we do is that the learning process is of high quality. It's rich in content, inherently challenging, and of intrinsic value to the student. And it's actually the pedagogy of day-to-day teaching is fundamentally personalised in the way you're responsive to the students' answers and how you push them, and knowing their responses and anticipating the way they respond is part of being a good teacher. But what about a programmed sort of view of personalisation? I can imagine a Michaela personalised learning programme delivered by their dream team of committed teachers, building on their amazing foundations of the Year 7 curriculum, where students do start making choices, where they diverge in numerous directions, exploring niche interests, leading to an amazing array of exceptional work. So far from harming these children, I can imagine that the imagined Michaela personalised learning programme would be fabulous. It would be brilliant, because personalisation itself is not the issue. It's not harmful. It's only harmful if it is bad, if the choices include opting out, aiming low, guessing and making stuff up. If teachers are sidelined and teachers are left to flounder in their own ignorance, that's obviously bad. But bad education is harmful. But that's not what I'm talking about. So I'm sorry to do this, but I have actually got some examples as well. So let me just go through. So at what age is personalisation not only desirable, but inevitable? Recently, I had a Year 13 student this week who came to me with his EPQ essay, Extended Project Qualification, on the origins of dark matter. We were talking about wimps and machos and how we can detect them. I did one last year where the student was talking about Kuhn's paradigm shift. And by Year 13, it seems uncontroversial that learning should be personalised, that part of your curriculum be something you've chosen, that you've driven for yourself. So that seems to me nothing to discuss. But when might that begin? How much earlier in a student's life might they start doing that? When I was at school, I did O-level physics, and I remember a project now where we were given 4 weeks of curriculum time to do what we liked, and we all did different experiments. Mine was to try to make a perpetual motion machine where I made my own motor, and I tried to connect it to a generator and see if the generator could drive the motor. It didn't work. That was part of it, and we spent ages sort of tweaking this thing, and we learned a lot about the physics. I chose that project. My friend did one about a magnetic levitation bed. He had all these magnets. He tried to make something float on them. I still remember those projects now. We learned a lot about physics, but we could do it for ourselves, and we really enjoyed it. That was personalised to me. I chose it, and I still remember doing it. When I was at Kegs, and see Tim in the audience there, we had this project called Project 9 for ICT, where the students chose units of ICT that they wanted to learn. Other students taught them. So you had students teaching Raspberry Pi, Python, C++, PC building. The students chose the course they wanted to do. Other students chose what they wanted to teach. There was lots of learning. It was very, very student-led, partly because none of the teachers knew any of those things, and so the students were the only people that could teach it. Going back recently at my school, we had a project soapbox where students had to get up and speak and talk about something that they cared about. And obviously they had some standard things that they all had to do, but the great joy of it was that they'd chosen something that was personal to them. No harm was done to them when they had to choose that. No harm was done to my Project 9 students. No harm was done to me when I had this element of choice. I remember maybe a more extreme example, where when I was at Kegs, I did a process called co-construction with my Year 7 RE class, where I started the unit by saying, we're doing Islam, what would you like to know? And they actually thought of the questions, the areas of study, the lines of inquiry. Some of the students in the class were Muslim, so clearly we had to take that into account. We also talked about, so that we designed the content of the course, the questions they'd answer, specialist teams were formed, and they were making lots of choices. And when I said you can present this information or convey the information in any way you liked, no, you can write an essay, or you might do a presentation, make a video. Initially, some of the students were floundered because they didn't know they were allowed to make choices. And I said, no, you can choose. And actually, the process of making the choice was the thing they found the hardest. Once I encouraged them that any of these formats was valid, they sort of were encouraged to do it. And one of them made this amazing website full of this information, which is very factually sound, that he'd compiled through the lessons. And he taught it from that to the class, because he was an expert, because he was a Muslim, and he was able to tell the class about his religion. And it was an extraordinary thing. I was never expected any student to make a website in Year 7. I didn't even know how to do it myself at that stage. This was before blogging. They aced the test. We had a test on the topic. They aced the test. They came to no harm. So I would say that actually there are lots of different subject areas, art, music, certainly, where students have to reach a point where the personalisation is even the essence of the subject. And you can't just turn that on like a switch. You can't really do well at GCSE or art at A-level without, at some point, being encouraged to follow your own path and to actually take risks with your own learning and to own it. And to say that students aren't capable of that at some point in their curriculum, I think, is to misunderstand teenagers. Of course they do. They do have ideas, they do have interests, and some of those things need to be pursued. So I think I'm going to sort of wrap up so we can get into a bit more debate. If we're talking about differentiation and students with individual learning needs, I agree, setting a bar high is absolutely necessary. I do think it's absolutely right, as Katie was saying, that to lower standards for students as if that's what personalisation means is a mistake. But if we regard personalisation as an inherent feature of teaching a class of individuals, or as a process by which we introduce elements of choice and control into our curriculum, and give value to divergence in content and outputs of the learning process at a time that's appropriate for the learners, when they have the knowledge and the skills to take it on, it can't be true that it harms children. And that's especially true if we're measuring harm as a long-term outcome. I'm thinking, like, if you're an adult looking back over your education, it's arguably true that the students who've gained a high-quality, knowledge-rich education, but with a strong component of personalisation that allow them to pursue certain interests, they'll be more fulfilled, they might have a broader appetite for lifelong learning, and because of those experiences that they gained. I would say that you could argue that actually that there's more harm done from a standardised model where we have a limited view of what is to be a standard diet. I think as a society we're richer because over time people will have studied slightly different texts in English, slightly different periods of history, even if we have some things in common. And I don't see why some students shouldn't have had some input into what those things might have been, given that which texts you read and which periods in history has a degree of arbitrariness to it. So not only is, I would say, personalised learning does not harm children, I would say actually it's the opposite, that standardised curriculum, in the way that I've described it, is what would do the most harm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Katie, one second.
Okay.
Get my pen back so I can write.
Of course, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, get ready to write some notes, Tom. Yeah. Some really interesting points there raised by Tom, and in particular, I think, again, there's some common ground here. I think it's really nice that we agree about the fact that we shouldn't lower standards, and actually, I really like Tom's point that bad education is harmful. I absolutely agree, you know, who would disagree with that? But there are a few points that I would like to pick up on, and I'd like to kind of start with a scientific rationale for why I believe that whole class instruction is preferable to personalised learning. And then I'd like to kind of directly respond to some of Tom's points about giving children choice in the curriculum. So first of all, one of the things I've noticed recently teaching some of my classes at Michaela using a whole class model is that when I see that one child has formed a misconception or one child has got something wrong, what I'm actually seeing is that's revealed a flaw in my instruction. That has revealed that I have not actually explained something to the right level. So not everybody has actually been able to learn that. And what you tend to find usually is that a couple of children, more than a couple of children, may have that wrong, but in fact it's probably more like half the class that actually have formed that misconception and don't understand it. So I think it's quite important that we realise the benefits of whole class instruction first of all, before we get too taken away by the romantic idea of giving children choice, which I think is a very romantic idea, and it sounds lovely, but I actually do think it's flawed. Number one, because it means that children miss out on the benefits of the teacher being able to recognise flaws in their own instruction, and therefore changing and altering their instruction accordingly so that the children can have a better chance of understanding the concept next time. And number two, because I think that variety and choice are overrated. I think they are a red herring in education. And I think the choice is a red herring because of the kind of novice expert continuum, which we need to think about. And I know that was something that came up a lot in Peter and Daisy's debate earlier. And I think it's really important. A lot of the examples that Tom gave were from A-level, and I think actually at A-level, it's probably fair to say that some children should be able to give the option to study different texts, for example. A question I would ask is the classroom the right place to do that? Should they be able to, for example, I did, philosophy and English A-level. Could I perhaps go and study a philosopher I was interested in my own time? Or would it be better to do that in the classroom? I would argue that the child should be doing that in their own time, and there should be a core curriculum that they get access to in the classroom, because there are things that are core that everybody must go away with and everybody must learn. Of course, well, that's what I think, and I'm sure there'll be some people in the room who would quibble that idea that there are some things that everyone must learn. The other reason I think choice is overrated further down the curriculum, so when you're younger, is because children are novices. Peter said we shouldn't treat children like novices, and I know I'm not debating with Peter, but I just wanted to pick up on that point, because actually children are novices. Children do not know as much about algebra as the maths teacher does. We need to remember that. Children should not be given the choice to choose, oh, I fancy doing square numbers today, because they're not curriculum designers. You know, they haven't got a clue what the best sequence of concepts is in order for them to really master and understand maths at a high level. Of course they haven't. So it's wrong to suggest that we should give children choice over the curriculum, and it's also better to teach children in a whole class model because it enables, it enables everyone it enables the teacher to really understand what's going on in the room and to make sure that every other child has access to that restructured explanation of a concept rather than just that one child that didn't get it. Okay, moving on.
Okay, thank you. I think actually I only gave one example, which was A-level, which is EPQ, and all the other ones I gave were from low down the school, so students in year 7, 8 and 9. And this was working at a grammar school, and I learnt a lot there. What I learnt working at a grammar school for a few years was that there are students who are capable of doing things which I'd never believed they could do. And it raised my expectations. And I realised when I'd been teaching before in a comprehensive school, I had been putting a lid on what the students could do, because I was the person setting the parameters for that all the time. And what I learnt there was that actually, if you sort of take the lid off that and you find out what they can do more often than you expect them to. And I think that's really important. And if without that psychology of let's find out what's possible from the students, you do end up putting a lid on them. And if you think you are the person and you're marching everyone forward in rows like this, actually what you can do is holding some of the students back. You might not want to, but you can. And actually, I've met many students who are very, very able to lead parts of their learning at that school. And actually, what I realised was that those students were always in all the other schools I've ever worked in as well, but I didn't recognise them. So I think in terms of, for example, teaching the most able, or gifted and talented, or whatever people still call it, I think that phrase is fortunately dying out, which is good. Actually, I do think some students are fundamentally, systematically under-challenged too often because teachers don't personalise in that way at the high end. What you talked about with Jason was interesting, because actually there you're talking about a student, what I think, again, that's a common approach which people do with it. Poor Jason, I thought that was I wouldn't disagree with that. But it isn't sort of some of the things that you do with someone like Jason personalised. So at my school we have an intervention, a reading intervention, which is highly targeted on our very weakest readers, where they have to sit with an individual person one-to-one to accelerate their reading. That's a necessary aspect of their curriculum, because we find that accelerates them faster than if they were in their mainstream lessons. And you might think that's not a good way of doing things, but we find they're making rapid progress because they have individual support. And that then allows them to catch up. So where those programs work for students at the very weakest end of the spectrum, I think personalisation is needed, and at the very top. So the problem comes if you then say that if you overstate the case that all the students are basically the same. I think it's like running a plantation rather than growing a beautiful garden of possibilities. You're sort of saying this is what I'm going to get. And standardisation then limits horizons of what's possible. I have been blown away over and over by students who've brought things to me that I didn't know they could do because I gave them the chance to show that. A teacher at a school I worked in before this one used to do this fantastic project with students where she would say to the class that she wanted them to produce a piece of work to summarise their learning on a topic. And her instruction was just, make something that dazzles me. And that was the entire instruction. And the results were amazing. And she didn't say, I want one of these and it must have these criteria. Because the students were challenged to go away and bring themselves to the learning and show what was possible, it was really breathtaking. And I think that sort of experience as part of a diet, which is rigorous and very teacher-led, is important. So as long as we don't think of personalised learning as sort of needing to happen all the time in every lesson, if you think of it as part of a sort of entire experience, then I think choice within a whole scheme of work or within an entire curriculum is fantastic, it's exciting, and it's the things that students remember, and it's about getting the right proportion of that and making sure that all the students have got the right sort of preconditions in their knowledge to able to do that well. And that's the subtle art of teaching, to get that balance right. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Okay, so again, some really good points there from Tom. I kind of want to pick up on this idea of a standardised approach holding back some students, particularly at the top ends. That is, of course, a legitimate fear of kind of, as Tom's put it, a standardised curriculum. I would say a couple of things back to that. Firstly, we massively underestimate the power of overlearning in teaching. We think children have got it, so if I go back to a lesson I was teaching last week on the apostrophe, I might think, oh, there's a few kids that have already kind of got this, and there's one or two that really don't, so I'm going to reteach it. You could argue that that means those 4 or 5 kids who've already got it are basically just kind of repeating and doing something they already know and are not being pushed hard enough. But we need to ensure that children do spend time overlearning stuff, because that's how they'll remember it. If they don't spend enough time overlearning it, they're not going to remember it in 10 years' time. So it's not enough just for them to get it, they need to practice it over and over and over. But if that's not a good enough response, then, I understand some people might not buy that, and you might think, well, yeah, but some kids may have overlearned it, they may have got it, and you may still be holding them back. That's legitimate. I would say that you have to ensure that your curriculum is extraordinarily challenging. So I would say at Michaela, the curriculum is pitched to the top set. For example, we did a grammar test yesterday, and the top set students didn't all get 100%, but that is the same test that pupils at the kind of lower end, in our lowest stream, also sat, and they were getting more like 60-70%. Okay, so that's the kind of spectrum we're looking for. You're looking for a curriculum that does push the top, and where you do get a bell curve, and the bottom children are still kind of given enough time and support to achieve. But finally, the final point I want to make to summarise today. So I've argued that it lowers expectations. I've argued that there is a scientific rationale for overlearning, for a whole class approach. But finally, I would like to kind of make a moral argument in favour of whole class instruction instead of personalised learning. And the moral argument I want to make is this. If we set up a system where the teacher's role is to serve the child and do everything in their power to enable that child to learn, to fill in the gaps in their knowledge, not only does that create a huge burden on the teacher's workload, but it creates a culture of entitlement for the child. It makes the child feel entitled, and it reduces the amount of responsibility that the child has to take for their own learning. And it means, fundamentally, that they are enfeebled in the long run. And what might seem kind in the short term is actually less kind for the long term. It's really important that children are encouraged, if they're behind or if they want to study something of their own choice, that they take responsibility for that. That's not something that a teacher orchestrates, because frankly, teachers are teachers, and children should be in charge of their own kind of responsibility for their own learning. So there are 2 arguments basically that I would make in favour of whole class instruction over personalised, which is firstly the scientific approach. Overlearning is really important. Number 2, the moral approach that we don't want to lead children to feel entitled that the teacher's there to serve them. So that's all I had to say. Thank you. That was bound to happen.
Thank you, and summarise teacher.
Thank you. I would love my year 10s to appreciate me more and recognise that I was there to serve them. I think what I would like to summarise is I think we wouldn't disagree that, that when you talk about the cult of personalisation, I'd say is an issue. And actually, I think one of the as a sort of a seminal moment in my professional life was being in a Mockstead process in my own school with probably the best chemistry teacher I've ever met, with somebody who was in there telling me that this lesson was only good because there was no differentiation. And I was saying, but there was no differentiation needed because everyone understood it the first time, and they were all making excellent progress. And that whole sort of Ofsted enforced thing, which is now thankfully gone, where you needed a specific sort of tick box thing to differentiation, I think we've moved past that. So I would conclude by saying, I think we need to view personalising as not sort of a dumbing down process, not this requirement of must, should, could learning objectives, which is the kiss of death. And But it's more about the kind of the nuance of teaching a complex set of individuals in a classroom. And there's a trade-off between efficiency and sensible practice about most students are going to have similar misconceptions, absolutely. Most students are going to be stretched if you're stretching the most able person in the class. That's the best way to go, absolutely. But still within that, they are individuals. And I can't think of my own class that I'm teaching at the moment for 4 hours a week without thinking of the people in it. I plan broadly what I'm going to do, but every time I'm giving feedback from a test or anything, I'm thinking about Riza, who sits at the front, and Sem, who's very cocky and doesn't actually think he has anything to learn, and Mo at the back, who has probably going to have forgotten his book again because he's not stayed at his house the night before, and that sort of thing. And I'm thinking, I need to be setting my standards, I need to be working with them, I need to be thinking of them as people and individuals in order to get them with me in the learning, looking in my eyes and taking the instruction from me. I can't just stand up there and say, force them to look at me and expect that to be working. I don't think that's how it works. So I need them with me, I need to think of them as individuals. But that aside, in that sort of gardening approach to thinking of the individuals is also just one thing. The other thing I was just saying is, at Michaela, I would love it if you tried in your school to think of a project which was personalised, where the students did have the opportunity to just fly and see what they could do without you telling them what it would be, and see what they come up with. I bet it would be brilliant. And you'd be surprised yourselves by what they did, given how much you filled them at the beginning. I don't think you need to control every step of the way. And in fact, if you tried it, I'd be interested to hear how it went. Are you genuinely surprised by what your students are capable of if you give them the chance to show you? And if you don't give them the chance to show you, you're never going to find out. That's what I've finished with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both Katie and Tom. And now it's time for questions. Who would like to address questions to Katie? Let's take questions for Katie first. Take this gentleman at the front here, please.
I accept.
Can you eat the microphone?
I completely agree that one should have whole class instructions. Is the best opportunity to try to raise all children to the top level or as far as they can go. And I agree that I disagree with Tom that we should have personalised outcomes in the curriculum. We can learn the core knowledge in English, in maths, in every subject. It's important you can't just have history where children learn what they like. There are some periods that are fundamental and everyone needs to know. But there is a problem. When children arrive in your school or in any school, in year 7, you will have children who obviously can't read well, don't know how to do column multiplication, they still use their fingers. They can't do carryover or borrow. It's very simple things so initially you will have to need to have a specific personalized program to try to bring them to the level where they can then join the whole class instruction. I wonder whether you can explain that.
So what I would say in response to that is that we are not saying that there shouldn't be some structural differentiation in place in year 7 in order to catch people up. But what I would say about that, for example, there are some students who in their first year do extra English and maths, do phonics, for example, do lots of different bits and pieces so that they can get up to speed. And you're absolutely right about that. You can't just plough through without taking that into account. But that doesn't mean that we teach them in a different way, first of all, and it also doesn't mean that they don't access the same work in mainstream lessons. So yes, they may be doing phonics in other lessons, and yes, they may be doing counting on one hand in other lessons, but when they're in mainstream lessons, they're still reading the same text, they're still doing the same problems, they're still doing the same writing as they would do were they not kind of confronted by those barriers when they started. So additional structural differentiation on top, but same stuff in mainstream. can actually support those children to go even further. And to kind of pick up on Tom's point about you'll be amazed by what they can do. I have been amazed at Michaela by how resilient our pupils are when it comes to reading. Those coming in with reading ages of 5 and 6, sit them in front of the Aeneid, and they're all right. They can cope with it. In fact, they love it. They can answer questions on it, and they do a really good job. So, those two things there's no tension there, I don't think.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions for Tom? There's a gentleman over there, please.
Hiya. It's actually a two-part question. I hope that's okay. Probably not.
Make it quick.
As a maths teacher as well, I have in the past given students the choice, and they often take the path of least resistance, and so they work on the things that they can already do, and maybe that harms their long-term progress. The other thing is, do you think that personalised learning is this decade's VAK, and perhaps spending all this time on it isn't the right approach and may harm our pedagogy in the long run?
Well, I don't see, for me, VAK is just, actually there is a hilarious document by David Miliband, which is called Personalised Learning, which was from 2004. And in that, it's like the Labour Party, it's a horrible, it does talk about VAK as part and parcel of personalised learning. And it's sort of, that's not an association I'm making. I think maths is one of the subjects, I think personalised learning needs to be in the right place. So where there's some area of arbitrariness about the content, and where students' experience can come to bear. So, for example, with RE or other things, where there is, people's personal experience is valid, and so you can use personalised learning as a way to fuel it. And certainly a Year 13 physics class, when you're choosing a project, you can do it there. Maths is probably one of the least likely subjects to lend itself well to personalised learning, I would say. Although you can do a little bit of it with some of the format for some of the reporting back on, say, a data collection and statistics exercise or something like that. So no, I'm not giving my students choices in my maths class per se. In that context, I'm personalising by the way and the way I explain back and some of the motivational aspects of my teaching to get them engaged with the maths. I find I really need to work very hard on that, actually, in my class. I'm finding that the more standardised I am, I find that really difficult. It's the hardest thing of my job, I'd say, every week, is getting certain individuals in my class with me in my teaching. I think that is personalisation. That's how I view it. I don't think that's about VAK, though, and I'm not certainly going to start talking about they need sort of kinesthetic opportunities. It's more that, every question you ask, students interpret slightly differently. Every maths test is a slightly different combination of wrong answers. And that's the challenge of giving feedback. Is it more efficient to give standard feedback? How do I get each student to connect with their particular level of misunderstanding? I think personalisation is an element of that, and it's the hardest thing.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions for Katie? This gentleman at the front. Olivia. Sorry.
I'm pretty much with Katie on this. Pretty much with Katie on this, but I do have a question. I think there is a wider cultural context that's developed over the last 20, 30 years that feeds into this. We're all supposed to embrace and celebrate difference in every form that takes and play down universals and objectivity. And along with that, we're also, at the same time, we're not meant to really have any judgments or views about those differences. And that feeds through into schools in various ways. Personalisation is one. Another is just the general unease about saying that some things are right or wrong. So my question to you is, are you sort of criticising the symptom or the cause?
Both. I mean, the fact is, we do have a society which is built on the idea that everybody's different, everybody's unique. You shouldn't challenge one person's thing because that's what they want to do, that's their belief, that's their blah, blah, blah. I believe in truth, I believe in objectivity, and otherwise, how are we ever going to get anywhere? How are we going to decide anything if we don't build our systems on that, build our economy on it, build our schools on it? I think it's so important in schools, particularly with children, because there's so much at stake. And if we don't decide to teach them in a certain way, if we don't make solid decisions, we're just constantly experimenting with children, and I don't want to do that. So, good question, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Katie. Any more questions for Tom? Gentleman back over there. Oh, any more questions for Katie? Sorry, we'll come back to you.
Yeah.
We have that gentleman at the back over there. No, sorry. Wait, Tom. Wait, where were we? Tom. Question for Tom. That gentleman.
No, I was asking Katie.
Oh, no.
He's got a question for me.
Questions. That man.
That man there.
Sorry, guys.
Is this Tom or Katie? Tom.
Whatever you like, sir.
I just like to pick up on a few points that Tom came across with his summary, which was a lot of the debates we've heard about are great ideas in their purest form, which sound great in sort of theory, but in practice, obviously, we're hearing from, obviously, Michaela, which does things very well a particular way. In practice, the emphasis on personalised learning in most schools, my question is, has that emphasis actually, not so much in terms of the choice you give to students or pupils, but the idea of personalising your lessons, your resources, that sort of stuff, is there an opportunity cost in the sense that, my question is, what percentage of teacher workload is actually down to the emphasis on personalised learning, not in the way that you have envisaged, but in the way that senior leaders, Ofsted, have envisaged? How much of teacher workload is down to personalised learning? And the natural corollary to that is, could we be spending our time doing better things if that percentage is very, very high, if we're spending long time doing the personalised learning, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, it is. I think, you know, we need this whole the sort of the cult of differentiation, if you like, meaning different resources is disastrous. I think you can have staggered. So when I teach my maths class, it's helpful to have problems which ramp up, and there is a sort of levelling process where students in the same room are finding some easier and need more practice, and others can whip through and go harder. So good high quality textbooks which have questions which get harder are good, because your students can optimise the level of challenge, and that's helpful because it's been done for you. If you have to make those yourself, I find that massively time consuming, and actually, you know, I'm a big fan of textbooks which are good, and that's why I think it's good that we're going to have a stable curriculum, whatever you think of it, for the next sort of 10 years, so that we can get on the right resources which are going to last for a while and actually be professionally produced. I think that's good. So I agree with that. I think we have wasted a lot of time with a sort of must, should, could. I mean, the years of people going in there saying, where are your must, should, could objectives? It's horrific. I mean, I would say to my staff, I don't want to see that. I don't want them copying them out, and there is the objective for everybody. I agree with that. But then once you've done that, I think the personalisation as a pedagogy is even more important, because once you said, we're all aiming for this, you're all at different standards here, but you've got to get here, you need different kind of emphases for certain students to reach that. So it's more about that. And then anything done badly is bad, isn't it? And there will be some schools who are just a slave to that differentiation, which is wrong, and they're making the teachers work far too hard, and I totally agree that's a mistake.
Thank you. This gentleman at the back.
Okay, thank you. So, two quick questions for Katie. The first one, you said at the start that in your lessons everyone is expected to keep up with the reading. What if they can't keep up then? Surely that's when you need to start personalising things. And secondly, I'm not too familiar with what goes on in the classroom, Michaela, but did you say that you stream the classes?
Yeah.
And is that not a way of personalising things then if the classes are streamed?
Yeah, thank you actually, because I meant to talk about that, but I got kind of on a rant instead. So, so we do stream, and the reason we stream, I actually think is an argument in favour of whole class instruction, because pupils who have got similar kind of reading ages, for example, are more likely to make the same mistakes. So they're more likely not to understand what some of the vocabulary in the texts means, for example. So that wouldn't, you know, the kind of standardised approach wouldn't make me want to go and teach mixed ability, because I actually think that would end up causing some of the workload problems that I think was raised in the last question. So yeah, we do stream, and I think streaming gives us all the benefits of mixed ability, in that there's kind of a team spirit in the class, and there's a real sense of ownership, and also because we've named the streams, we don't number them. Children don't necessarily know that they're in the bottom stream. We don't talk about them being at the bottom or at the top. So we try really hard to kind of mitigate against the problems of setting through the streaming model.
So you start they know if they get a certain class, they're on to teach a certain way. So just staff them.
No, it's not necessarily a certain way, because it's exactly the same curriculum and it's exactly the same pedagogy. I mean, if you come to Michaela, you walk into one room, you walk into the next, you wouldn't even know that you were in a different room. I mean, it really is identical. And the thing is that that it just means that the kinds of mistakes that the children will make, the things they won't understand will be different. So you might give them a bit extra time in the lower stream, for example, and you might make more of a kind of, for example, when I teach literature, when I'm reading a story with a group, with a top set, I wouldn't necessarily need to, top stream, I'm in the bad habit of saying set. With the top stream, I wouldn't necessarily have to tell them as much up front about the story, whereas with the lower stream, I might tell them a lot about the content of that story because their comprehension will depend on that upfront explanation. So I think certain things you'll do a bit differently, but it's certainly not differentiated, and it's not personalised. It's certainly not personalised, no. And then the point about your first question was, if they don't get it, what do you do? Yeah, okay. So if they don't get it, well, like I said, I think that actually reveals that quite a number of children haven't got it. And I would actually prefer teachers generally to introspect a bit more and think about the quality of their instruction. Think, well, actually, look, if somebody's not getting this, I haven't explained it properly. That is what that reveals. It doesn't reveal, oh, that poor little kid, he needs a bit of extra help. It reveals, I've done something wrong, and there's a number of kids in here who are sitting here with a misconception that I need to address. And that's the dynamic I think we need to create a bit more. But actually, you don't want to go too far that way. I think that does sound a bit extreme. On top of that, you do also want children to actually spend some additional time doing their own work. So there is a certain amount of knowledge that children can do without a teacher in front of them. So can learn, I suppose. So I would say go home and do some extra self-quizzing. That's their homework using the knowledge organisers that we have at Michaela. You need to go and focus on the dates for the tutor period, or you need to go and focus on your 4 times table. You need to put the onus on them if there's a gap in their knowledge and they still haven't got it. If that's not because of your instruction, if it is because the child has been lazy or has not listened or whatever, then actually they need to take responsibility and they need to solve that problem. So there's kind of 2 answers to that. And it is context dependent. So good questions, thank you.
Okay. Do you have any further questions for either side? Start at the back.
Tom, I don't think you've really dealt with Katie's point about overlearning. So, for example, you said that you've got your maths textbook and there's harder questions and easier questions. And some people will whip through the easier questions and onto the harder ones. But surely doing things that you can already do, that's overlearning, and that's needed for mastery. And will pupils ever choose to do that?
Well, I think it's a good... I haven't said that you shouldn't do overlearning. In fact, I think I agree that you should. But it's all about degrees, isn't it? So I do think, there is that... you've got sort of 50 questions, and you might... How many questions you need to do, and some might... need more than others. I mean, if you're saying that they all need to do the same number, I would say, well, that's not how it seems to me. But certainly, gosh, I mean, and then when you do different topics, there's a bit of loss of memory, you need to recap and interleaving, all that sort of thing is important. So I think interleaving, I mean, overlearning is important, but it doesn't mean that that's sort of the standardisation kicks in there. I think in a typical maths class, it's quite normal for students to have different levels of facility with certain types of questions, and so that's one of the things. So in terms of the resource question, having harder questions to move on to when you sort of think you've done enough, how much overlearning is needed before you feel like you've mastered it at the moment, But I agree. I mean, the last test I gave back my students in year 10, oh my God, t squared plus t squared is not t to the power of 4. I could have screamed that 1,000 times over. And we're having to go back and do basic stuff and actually fractions, percentages, and basic multiplication. You need to overlearn those over and over and over again, because those add up to half a maths paper is basically those 3 things. I didn't address it, but I still think you need to then allow students to find another level. And it depends on how mixed your class is. I found English teachers at my school struggled from when we went from more sets to fewer, because they were saying, oh my God, but the range is wider. And they were quite neatly sort of slotted in, where they're thinking the students, so for them in this class, they'll all be the same. And now they're only a tiny bit wider. The range was challenging to them. So I think setting is an interesting aspect of this whole discussion, actually, because once you assume the students are pretty much the same, I think you lose. All classes are mixed ability classes, and you do need to allow for students to hit the top, and sometimes I think that doesn't happen. I'd say I used to say about my children's education at primary school that they were systematically under-challenged every day. I used to genuinely feel that. And I think that's probably true of a lot of children, that they are marched forward. And in fact, in a lot of these debates, I actually think that, you know, personalised learning, although I think standardised learning is actually the standard diet for most children in most schools. And it's actually taking the lid off is something at the top end. I think we need to do more. So I'm a bit worried about this agenda if, you know, standardising if it's always set high, that's good, but we need to make sure that's true. If we're going to have standardising and some of the things that Katie's been talking about, I'm listening to and thinking, well, that's really interesting, but it has to be so that no child is held back by that. And not every teacher has the confidence to always do that. And because it feels if too many children aren't getting it, you sort of pull back a bit, and that pulls back the possibilities for the most sophisticated learners in the room.
We have no more time for questions, but in the spirit of debate and changing your minds, if you thought that personalised learning harms children and you have changed your mind, please raise your hand. Okay. Wait. No, that's not good for you.
Oh, that's your opposite.
They're my rules, I'm taking it.
I don't even know which side of the debate I'm on.
I'm filling it up.
If you thought that personalised learning was fine and you now think, ooh, not so sure about that, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Miss Purvis.